finally, I do just wonder if the mainstream media are starting to realize there's a story about Meghan Markle and her past that has long not been told.
I was, 17 years older.
So, first and foremost, where this kind of rumor has come from, where apparently, allegedly, Megsy's lying about her age and she's older than what she actually claims to be.
So when Meghan came along into the scene, I just thought, this is fascinating. How is this going to play out? To tell the truth, I spoke to very few friends of Meghan because she put a fatwa on anyone talking to me.
The other thing I'm going to say, and I know this is weird, but there's one of those conspiracy theories on the internet that she might not have actually carried her babies, one or both, that they may have used a surrogate.
And that's the problem. They've stupidly put out so many dumb lies, the car chase, etc., that now nobody believes anything they say. And that's scary and dangerous.
There are so many telltale signs that something is clearly wrong with Meghan. And I don't mean it in a bad way, but I mean, how can you get your age so wrong?
You see, this is, she can't actually make a good relationship with anyone because she has to have it her way. It must be. And she gets very fed up if people don't immediately do what she wants.
I am just so done with the prove it game. Yes. When you get to the place where you feel I don't have to prove anything to you anymore. I have to prove that I'm a good person.
Meghan Markle has apparently been the subject of age confusion more than once, with the same birthday talk resurfacing in different years. 3 details keep pulling that number back into the spotlight: a graduation photo, a line her own mother once said publicly, and a legal record that, according to online discussions, the press has not closely examined.
How this lady has turned 45. And Link, it's just such bad news because all of a sudden, this birthday, this 45th birthday, has turned into an absolute disaster for Meghan Markle.
None of that led some viewers to believe anything by itself. But when you line those details up, the public timeline starts to look less clean. And the few people who could clear it up in an afternoon have all pointed to 4 years, not 2.
So what is going on here? Why the secrecy around this woman's birth certificate? Why the secrecy? Why the mistakes in age that are so blatant for others?
Start with the loop that never seems to close. Online critics are not only questioning the year, they are also asking whether Meghan herself may have been told the wrong thing at some point, or repeated an age detail that was misunderstood early on. There is no document backing that theory, but it is the first unanswered possibility critics keep putting on the table. That is what keeps the discussion alive, because once that question gets raised, people start looking at every other detail a little more closely. And that is exactly why the reaction has not faded away. Once a detail like this starts circulating, online discussions do not stay focused on the number alone. They start circling around what was said, who said it, and why the same version keeps showing up in different places. Some commenters have treated the whole thing as a simple mix-up, while others think the repeated confusion is what makes the topic harder to dismiss. What makes it matter, at least in the public conversation, is that people are not just reacting to one isolated claim. They are reacting to a pattern that seems to invite more questions than answers. That is why every new mention draws attention again, even when no official clarification has been provided. For supporters, it is just internet noise. For critics, it is the kind of lingering discrepancy that keeps the speculation alive and pushes the conversation into a much wider spotlight.
5-6 years older than what she's publicly claiming to be. Where is this coming from?
It keeps hanging on because of that distance. Doria and Meghan spent years apart during Meghan's younger years, and the public explanations have never really gone into much detail. That gap is not proof of anything. It is simply the place where the story keeps circling back.
Developing today, Meghan Markle's TV fallout with her mother Doria Ragland over just 2 words. Now, you'll know things have not been good between these two for some time.
Then there is the marriage nobody really talks about. Most people know Trevor Engelson, but far fewer have heard the claims circulating among online researchers that there may have been a husband before him, years before any palace attention. No certificate has ever been published to back that up, so the claim remains unverified, but it is exactly the kind of detail that keeps people questioning the timeline.
whose lives are shrouded in mystery, and they've climbed the greasy pole. They want to be famous, they want to be influential, they want to be powerful, and they want to hide their secrets. And I just love digging away to find out what they don't want us to know.
Why that matters is pretty straightforward. A marriage is paperwork, and that means signing a legal document with your full legal name and date of birth. That kind of record gets filed with a county office, then placed into a public archive, where it does not just quietly disappear. And that is where the conversation starts to get even more complicated. Because once people believe a record should exist, every gap in the timeline suddenly looks bigger than before. Online commentators are not treating this as a single stray detail anymore. They are looking at the larger pattern and asking why so many different versions keep getting pulled back into the same discussion. For some viewers, that just means the internet has latched onto a story that may never be fully settled. For others, it is the lack of clear official explanation that keeps the debate alive, because unanswered questions tend to spread fast once they catch public attention. And when a topic keeps resurfacing like this, every small mention can make people recheck the same details all over again. That is why the reaction has stayed so active. It is not only about what was said, it is about what has not been clearly addressed, and that silence is exactly what allows the speculation to keep moving from one conversation to the next.
Those who are not authorized by law to receive a certified copy may request an informational certified copy, which will be marked, quote, informational, not a valid document to establish identity, and statutorily required information will be redacted. But anyone in the world can get an informational certificate for birth, marriage, or death records.
So a record like that would include a birth year, and if it lined up, the question would be settled. If it did not match, that would not automatically mean anything improper, but it would still be a serious inconsistency sitting inside a public archive, one that would reasonably call for an explanation from someone.
Well, I found enough people, more than enough, nearly 80 people to talk.
But if we know that they don't like her, why are they going to be offering an unbiased account of their experience?
I understand. Well, because I sift it through. I don't put in stuff which isn't true and can't be checked.
And apparently, no one has taken a close look. Not a single biographer, not one documentary producer, not even a royal correspondent with a solid research budget. For someone who has been photographed so often, the simplest document in this discussion still has never been produced.
She demanded that the media do what she expects. I felt manipulated and betrayed. I felt played, orchestrated.
Played, orchestrated, that is the kind of language people keep using online when this topic comes up. Reporters have chased her school records, those old headshots, and even her father's phone calls, yet a county clerk's office would be far easier to check than any of that. Why nobody has gone there is still an open reporting question, and it has never been clearly answered. And that is exactly why the discussion keeps circling back, because once people think a basic record should be easy to verify, every unanswered question starts to feel louder. Online commenters are not just focusing on one document anymore, they are reading the silence itself as part of the story, and that is what keeps the reaction moving. At this point, the argument is less about a single detail and more about the way the whole timeline has been handled in public. Some viewers see that as proof of nothing at all, while others believe the lack of a clear explanation only gives the internet more room to speculate. Either way, the debate keeps building because no official clarification has fully settled it, and that leaves people comparing old mentions, public records, and past interviews again and again. So the conversation stays active, not because every claim is confirmed, but because the gaps keep inviting more questions, and in a story like this, that is often enough to keep the attention locked in.
There's no such thing as your truth or my truth. There's your version of events, and then there's facts. I thought that her job as a journalist is not to get a win-win. It is to expose the truth and find out what's really going on.
Now, the first thing people say you can actually point to is a physical copy, not just an online claim. Critics have brought up a 1997 issue of 17 magazine, where a Los Angeles contributor listing shows the name Meghan Markle and an age listed beside it as 21. That detail is being discussed as something printed on a newsstand page, rather than just a forum rumor. If you work that backward, some viewers say it points toward 1976, which is exactly why the detail keeps getting attention.
This is a copy of 17 magazine, and it was published in March of 1997. In it, it mentions our Megsy is from Los Angeles and that she was 21 years old at the time of publication. That would make her birth year at around 1976. However, why is it saying here she was born 5 years later in 1981?
The official birth year listed is August 1981. That version of events, she would have been 15 when that issue hit print. And 15 and 21 are not even close. This is not some small rounding issue. It is a 6-year gap on a page that was printed nationally, distributed widely, and can still be pulled from an archive today. According to online discussion around it, no one has ever publicly corrected that specific detail, which is exactly why people keep coming back to it.
Rachel Meghan Markle was born on August the 4th, 1981 in Los Angeles County, California.
Now, the fair counter-argument, and it is a strong one, is that magazines do make mistakes. Ages can get swapped during production, and a young person might even list herself as older just to be taken more seriously by an editor. On top of that, Markle is not exactly an unusual surname in a city as large as Los Angeles, so that listing could simply be referring to a different woman altogether, and no one has publicly confirmed otherwise. But that is also where the conversation gets more complicated, because once people start weighing a possible production mistake against a larger timeline question, the same detail can be read in very different ways. Some online commenters treat it like a simple archive error, while others say the point is not the page itself, but the fact that it fits into a wider pattern of unanswered questions that keeps resurfacing. That is why the reaction does not fade quickly. Every time a new person sees the old clipping, the discussion starts over from the beginning, and the lack of a clean, widely accepted explanation gives both sides room to keep arguing. Supporters are quick to point out that a single printed age on one magazine page does not settle anything, while critics say the silence around it only makes the public more curious. So the story keeps moving in that uneasy space between a likely mistake and a detail people refuse to stop examining. And as long as that tension stays unresolved, the internet will keep treating it like a question worth revisiting.
So why would this old 1997 publication of 17 say she was 5 years older, 21, which would make her 1976? Well, who knows? Clearly an accident. Maybe she was trying to play older then. Who knows? Sometimes you want to play older when you're younger. But yes, this was a mistake and it was not picked up before publication.
Any one of those explanations might have settled the issue, and that is exactly why critics say the magazine page may not be the whole story. A simple typo could account for one printed listing, but it does not answer the later details, especially the ones tied to places a young person's exaggeration would not easily explain, or to ages mentioned aloud by people said to be close to her. So, in online discussion, that page is not seen as the final answer. It is treated as the first crack in the story, the detail that made people start looking harder.
The reason that is all over the place is because there's little truth involved in the persona she's trying to create. If there was any truth, she wouldn't be, the lines wouldn't be all over the place.
The graduation photo, which critics have circulated widely online, shows Meghan in cap and gown with a year printed on the tassel. Some viewers read that as 95, but the published record says she graduated high school in 1999. If both details are taken at face value, they do not line up, and that is exactly why people keep questioning it.
She would provide proof of her real age. She never thought that we would peek and say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. There's something incredibly fishy, and expose how old she really is.
Take the critics' version, and the math changes fast. If she was 18 and graduating in 95, that would place her birth around 1977, which would put her at about 48 or 49 now, not 44. 4 years is not a tiny slip. It is a very different timeline. And that is why the debate keeps getting sharper, because once people think the numbers do not sit right, every small detail starts to feel loaded. Online discussions keep circling back to the same point. If one public record appears inconsistent, then what else might have been misunderstood, misprinted, or left unexplained? Supporters push back by saying the internet is rushing to conclusions, and that one clipped image or one old line is not enough to build a full timeline. Critics, though, argue that the bigger issue is not one isolated page, it is the way the same questions keep returning without a clean answer people can agree on. So the conversation stays stuck between doubt and denial, with both sides reading the same material very differently. That is what gives the whole thing staying power. The details may look small on their own, but in the eyes of online commenters, they keep adding up into a story that refuses to settle.
How this lady has turned 45. And Link, it's just such bad news because all of a sudden, this birthday, this 45th birthday, has turned into an absolute disaster.
And to be fair, tassel numbers in low-resolution scans can be genuinely hard to read, and enlarging a small image does not automatically make it more reliable. That photo is only as solid as the tassel detail is legible, and critics argue that it appears clear enough to matter. Still, that is a judgment, not proof.
Right. Yeah. And I did speak with Samantha as well about this a while ago. And I just said, hey, look, how old is she? What's going on? And she said, yeah, no, that this is her real age. And so I believe Samantha.
This is where the argument starts to weaken, at least in the eyes of critics. A graduating class includes hundreds of people, and there are usually yearbooks, reunions, and group photos to check against. If the earlier year were correct, some online commentators say someone from that class would likely have come forward on the record by now. But after 8 years, critics still have not pointed to a single classmate who has clearly done that.
Well, my sister was in her class. So my sister was in middle school with her, and I was in middle school when she was in high school. So I did a couple shows with her, and she was just always put together and great.
Now, there is also the mother angle. Doria Ragland was born in 1956, and she has publicly said she was roughly 20 when she became pregnant. That number did not come from a random comment or internet guess. It came from her own voice as she spoke about her own life, which is why people keep bringing it back into the conversation. And that is exactly why people keep revisiting it, because when a public timeline feels blurry, even a small inconsistency can turn into a bigger talking point. Some online commenters say the issue is not just the number itself, but the fact that the conversation never seems to get a clear, official clarification that settles the matter for everyone. That lingering gap is what keeps the speculation alive. Supporters point to the limits of memory, old records, and imperfect scans, while critics say those same limits are why the questions keep coming back in the first place. In other words, both sides are looking at the same information, but they are not reading it the same way at all. So the debate stays suspended in that uneasy middle ground, where nothing is fully resolved and nothing is fully put to rest. And once a topic gets into that zone, internet discussion tends to do the rest, recycling the same details, rechecking the same images, and treating every unanswered point like it still matters a great deal.
Something that is not connecting. There is something that is not right. And I haven't been able to get a hold of a birth certificate, of a copy of a birth certificate. So if any of you can get it for me, please do so.
Take 1956, add 20, and you end up around 1976. For the official timeline, Doria would have been closer to 25 instead. Both statements cannot line up at the same time. Of course, a memory can be a little loose, but critics point out that it still seems to round in the same direction as everything else.
She's a young woman. She's got peers and friends who she confides in. I was, 17 years older.
Then there is the yogurt shop story. Meghan has told this one for years, including in her conversation with Oprah. She said her first job was scooping frozen yogurt in Los Angeles at 13 years old. It sounds like a warm, humble beginning, but it also runs straight into California labor rules, which is exactly why people keep circling back to it.
But when I was 13, my first job was at a frozen yogurt place called Humphrey Yogurt. Great name. And that was in the 90s.
Employment rules in California make it heavily restricted to hire a 13-year-old for that kind of work, and those guidelines were not something newly put in place. So people online have read the story a few different ways. Either that shop may have been bending the rules, or the memory could be a little off, or she may have been older than 13 when she was working behind that counter. Whatever the case, that is exactly why the detail keeps getting picked apart. And that is why the discussion keeps hanging around instead of fading out. Once a detail gets repeated enough online, people start treating it like a puzzle that still needs a clean answer, even when the available information is limited or disputed. That is also where the frustration comes from, because each side thinks the other is ignoring something obvious. For supporters, these are just messy old stories being read too harshly. For critics, the repeated inconsistencies are exactly what make the questions hard to dismiss. So the reaction becomes less about any one detail and more about trust, memory, and whether the public ever gets a version of events that feels fully settled. And when that kind of uncertainty sits in the background, every new mention pulls the old debate right back to the surface. The result is a conversation that keeps reopening itself, with people online dissecting the same points all over again.
Taking the trash out as a 13-year-old girl? I mean, first of all, what is this tale she tells about her defying the labor laws just because she needed a little change to get a mix-up from those TV dinners she always had to eat? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, what are you talking about, 13-year-olds taking the trash out in the back alley? There was Yasmin Bleeth. Is this, did this really happen, or was this a fever dream? I just simply do not believe this story.
That same story also brings up a second issue. She has described meeting Yasmin Bleeth there and bringing up a commercial. Critics have pointed out that the commercial in question aired in 1997, which would place her at about 15 or 16 under the official timeline, not 13. So once again, the timeline does not seem to sit neatly in place, and the anecdote keeps refusing to stay settled.
Her father claims that she was born in 1981. So if she was born in 1981 when Yasmin Bleeth did that commercial, and like in 1997, she would have been 16 years of age, not 13.
None of these details would be damaging on their own. A magazine can print the wrong number, a photograph can be read the wrong way, and a parent can simply remember things differently. A childhood job can also blur over time. But critics say the pattern does not seem random. It keeps pointing in one direction, toward a woman who appears to be several years older than the record suggests.
They've stupidly put out so many dumb lies, the car chase, etc., that now nobody believes anything they say. And that's scary and dangerous because it sometimes puts us off in directions that we need to be better about. But man, the more and more I look at and research this stuff, I'm not obsessed with these two. I'm looking at them with a very clear eye.
So why would anyone keep a number like that attached to them? If you have spent any time around the entertainment world, you already know the answer. Age is never just a small detail there. It becomes a category all on its own, shaping which doors open, which conversations happen, and how long someone is allowed to stay in those rooms. That is what keeps this from being just another old internet rumor, because once people believe a timeline does not line up, they start looking at every related detail through the same lens. What might have been a harmless memory issue or a simple mix-up becomes, in online discussion, a much bigger question about how public narratives get built and repeated. That is also why the reaction tends to get so divided. Some viewers see the whole thing as people stretching small inconsistencies into something larger than they are, while others feel the repeated gaps are enough to keep the conversation alive. The claim remains disputed online, but the back and forth itself has become part of the story, especially when each new mention revives old screenshots, old clips, and old arguments that never seem to fully disappear. So even without a fresh major reveal, the topic keeps hanging around because people are not only debating one detail anymore. They are debating whether the public has been given a version that feels complete and whether the gaps are just innocent mistakes or part of a broader pattern that some viewers think deserves a closer look.
Why is she lying about this? Why? Why can't she just say, I'm so grateful to those producers who helped make me look amazing night after night and gave me my start in acting? Because it's more important to her to be a victim.
By 2011, when she auditioned for Suits, Rachel Zane was framed as a young, driven paralegal. In that kind of casting conversation, an actress in her mid-30s, especially one without a major credit yet, can be a tougher pitch for the role. None of that suggests anything improper. It just reflects a very ordinary industry incentive.
Just went in and auditioned for it. I think Patrick was the first one who was cast.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd gone and auditioned. I thought it was one of the worst auditions I had ever done and didn't realize that behind closed doors, they disagreed with me on that fact and brought me back to test.
And that is the trap inside this kind of edit. Once a number gets attached to casting paperwork, a profile, or a press kit, it stops feeling flexible. If it gets corrected later, people do not always read it as a simple update. They may see it as an admission. That is why the number keeps circulating.
There are so many things that are so wrong with this woman. Why would she keep getting something so wrong?
Which brings me to Trevor Eng. He knew her before the public image was fully polished, and he was around while that story was still being shaped. Since the divorce, He has reportedly stayed completely out of this conversation. No comment, no correction, nothing at all. That kind of silence stands out. And in stories like this, silence can be just as loud as a statement. When there is no clear correction, no public clarification, and no detailed explanation, online discussion tends to fill in the blanks on its own. That is part of why the conversation keeps moving, even when the details behind it are still being debated. People who follow this kind of celebrity timeline debate are usually not reacting to one isolated detail. They are reacting to the idea that a public image can be carefully shaped, then repeated often enough that small inconsistencies start to feel significant. Supporters may say that does not prove anything by itself, and critics usually counter that the repeated questions are exactly why the subject keeps coming back. So the issue is not just whether one date or one profile line was correct. It is how quickly a simple inconsistency can turn into a larger public trust issue once internet users begin comparing notes, pulling old material back up, and treating every small mismatch like part of a bigger pattern. That is what keeps this from fading out too quickly.
Trevor has been offered a ton of money by a ton of outlets to spill, and he never has, and he never will. And I think he's pretty circumspect about what he would say.
Now the situation starts to feel a lot more serious, because this moves beyond show business and into official paperwork. A United States passport application asks for proof of identity, proof of citizenship, and the date of birth you certify under oath. Knowingly and willfully giving a false date can be a federal issue. At the same time, there is no evidence that Meghan ever did that.
I just want to sit back and enjoy truth bomb after truth bomb after truth bomb being dropped by Jeff Banks in the MSM.
But she was traveling constantly, spending years filming in Canada, dealing with work permits, visas, immigration paperwork, border crossings, and all the records that usually depend on one steady set of identity documents. So the public takeaway is simple. Either that paper trail lines up with the birthday people know, or something in it does not. And nobody outside her legal team can see which is true.
I love to travel, and I travel so often. So for me, I think what I've learned is there's certain things that you can do that just make you look a bit more polished when you're traveling.
Then she entered the British royal family through marriage. And that kind of process is generally understood to involve far more than a basic credit check. There are usually legal teams, security screenings, and careful verification of names, dates, and background details. On paper, it is one of the most closely examined entrances into public life. And that is exactly why the online chatter keeps getting louder. Once people believe a simple detail was handled carefully, every later inconsistency starts to look bigger than it may actually be, even when no official explanation has been offered. The result is a cycle where questions keep resurfacing, because the public never feels like it has a complete answer. That kind of gap leaves room for all sorts of interpretation. Some viewers focus on the paperwork angle, others look at the public timeline, and critics say the uncertainty itself is what keeps the story alive. Supporters, meanwhile, argue that a missing clarification does not automatically mean anything improper happened, and that is the part of the conversation that never seems to settle down. So the tension is not just about one date or one form. It is about how quickly trust can be tested when a high-profile life story is built from documents, records, and public appearances that people can keep comparing long after the moment has passed.
So what is going on here? Why the secrecy around this woman's birth certificate? Why the secrecy? Why the mistakes in age that are so blatant for others?
So, critics keep coming back to the same uneasy question. Was it overlooked, or was it already understood? Neither angle has been publicly confirmed, but the debate continues because no public record explains what was reviewed, what was accepted, or whether this disputed timeline ever made it to anyone inside the palace at all. What is clear is the silence. No clarification, no denial, not even a brief comment from any unnamed source. On a topic where one sentence could have calmed the discussion, there has been nothing at all. And when that silence repeats for 8 years, people start reading it as a position.
We now live in this sort of dual world, don't we, where there is the truth and there is what celebrities can put out to be the truth via their chosen platforms.
Her father is the most puzzling silence of all. Thomas Markle has spoken in interview after interview about her childhood in remarkable detail, yet when he has been asked directly about the year she was born, he has seemed to sidestep it. Check the records yourself. That line stood out, because most fathers would know that number without hesitation. And that single response only made people look harder at everything around it. In online discussions, a short answer like that can feel almost louder than a full explanation, because it leaves room for people to fill in the blanks on their own. Some viewers took it as a sign that the topic was better left alone, while others saw it as another example of how this story keeps avoiding a clean answer. That is why the debate does not fade. It is not just about one document or one memory. It is about the pattern people think they are seeing, where every attempt to move past the question seems to pull it back into view. Critics argue that the lack of a clear, public clarification only gives the conversation more room to spread, while supporters say silence should not be treated like proof of anything. Either way, the reaction shows how fast a small detail can grow into a much bigger talking point when the public feels there is still something unresolved.
Something that is not connecting. There is something that is not right. And I haven't been able to get a hold of a birth certificate, of a copy of a birth certificate. So if any of you can get it for me, please do so.
Doria has never publicly shared the birth story either. No hospital details, no exact hour, and no reflection on what it felt like holding her daughter for the first time. Mothers often revisit that moment for years, but in this case, there is simply nothing on the public record about that one subject.
Meghan was my most important relationship and my pride and joy. So for her to suddenly forget me is very harmful and hurtful to me.
And the dates keep shifting in other corners too. Samantha Markle has claimed in her book that the real birth year was 1976, according to her account. That is her assertion, not a verified finding. On top of that, the listed birth year for a person described as a childhood friend was quietly changed online years later, which only drew more attention. Critics noticed the update, but no one has offered a clear explanation.
Meghan got fed up with this because she wants her to do exactly what she wants when she tells her.
And that is the part people tend to reach for only after everything else. If the older year were accurate, both pregnancies would have fallen into a range where medical monitoring is usually more intensive and the risk categories are more closely documented. That is all the math would suggest medically, nothing more. It would not point to anything beyond that. The louder theories built on top of it are still unsupported by any public evidence, and the claim remains unverified. And that is exactly why people keep circling back to it. Once a question starts looking unresolved, every small detail around it suddenly gets treated like it matters more than it probably would in any ordinary story.
And so in a Newsweek article that looked at this very same question, it looked into what her sister Samantha Markle has said about Meg's age. So in her book, The Diary of Princess Push's Sister, she confirms the year of Meg's birth as 1981, not circa 1976.
Online, that is where the conversation turns, not just toward the dates themselves, but toward the silence, the gaps, and the way some parts seem to be discussed while others are left untouched. That kind of reaction is what keeps the topic alive. Supporters say there is nothing unusual about old records and public memories not lining up perfectly, while critics argue that the repeated confusion only makes people more skeptical. Neither side has produced anything that settles it cleanly, and that is why the discussion keeps drifting from one piece of speculation to the next. So the bigger issue is not just what one document says, it is how a small unresolved detail can keep echoing through public debate long after people thought it had moved on.
The other thing I'm going to say, and I know this is weird, but there's one of those conspiracy theories on the internet that she might not have actually carried her babies, one or both, that they may have used a surrogate.
So in the end, it all comes back to three people: a father who tells people to check the records for themselves, a mother who has never publicly walked through that day, and Meghan, who, according to online discussions, has never been seriously asked this exact question in a major interview. That is why this keeps hanging around, not because the proof is conclusive, because it is not. It stays alive because no clear public clarification has come from anyone who could truly settle it, and when a story never gets a final answer, it keeps circling. If this age question has you thinking, Like, subscribe, share, and comment your take, because the record gaps around it still have people talking. See you on the next one.